a busy hour. So I was just saying that the plan for this coming hour is to look at our current version S.49 that we've gone through multiple times, unless there are any final edits to it. We have a version ready to vote. Then with the balance of the hour, Mr. Grady has already created the next draft of S.96, so we would just do a quick walk through so people know what the changes are, where they're located, and I'd ask people to read and respond to that between now and tomorrow because we're on track to vote the water bill S.96 tomorrow. Senator McDonald has come up with some amendments for S.96 and was good enough to get them already drafted. So we have those in writing to consider. We'll look at if the committee's interested in adding those to the current draft of 96, and then that takes us to 10. We should have done all that in the next 59 minutes. So with that, can you please walk us through any changes that happened to the last, the most recent version of 49?
Sure. Do you have draft 2.2, February 26, 5:05 p.m.?
That's what I have. Maybe they don't have the same.
Yeah, perfect.
On page 3,
505.
in section 2, on the interim drinking water standard, you wanted a tiered system for testing and what would be required if there were the three categories of results. The agency also asked to move the date from September 1st to December 1st. So on or before December 1st, 2019, and there was a request to clarify which of the categories of public water systems are required to do the testing. So on or before December 1st, 2019, all public community water systems and all non-transient, non-community water systems in the state shall conduct monitoring for the presence of PFAS contaminants in drinking water supplied by the system. Continued monitoring shall be conducted as follows until adoption of the rules under Section 3. If monitoring results detect the presence of any PFAS individually or in combination in excess of the 20 parts per trillion, the public water system shall conduct continued quarterly monitoring. If monitoring results don't detect the presence of any PFAS, or detect the presence of any PFAS individually or in combination at a level equal to or below 20 parts per trillion, the public water system shall conduct continued monitoring annually. If monitoring results do not detect the presence, the public water system shall conduct continued monitoring every 2 years. Page 4, line 4, there was a request to change the word detect to confirm. Monitoring results confirm the presence of any PFAS. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Page 5, lines 1 through 3. We realized that this interim section needed to have some enforcement and appeals attached to it. So the Secretary may enforce the requirement of the section under its enforcement authority in 10 VSA Chapter 201. And a person may appeal the actual decision of the Secretary under 10 VSA Chapter 220.
So this is, it's in essence boilerplate for such a rule.
Yep. On page 8, in that investigation of potential sources of PFAS contamination, there had previously been a requirement that there be testing using the oxidizable precursor test. There was question about whether it was the proper test for this. So what has been proposed is a pilot program As part of the investigation of the sources of PFAS contaminants, the Secretary shall conduct a pilot project at a public water system to evaluate PFAS that are not quantified by standard laboratory methods using a total oxidizable precursor assay or other applicable analytical method to evaluate total PFAS.
So I'm noticing that in sub B in that same section, there's a September 1, 2019
Yeah, that
date.
should be December.
And I have a question as to why September, we can come back to it, but I'll just flag it. The question I have is why move from September off to December? Let's finish blocking and then we'll
Okay. On page 9, sections 8 and 9, that's putting in the enforceability and appeals for the authority you're giving the Secretary in Title III to do interim environmental media standards for 2 years for any contaminant. And then on page 10, it's the requirement for the Secretary to publish for public and review and comment a plan to collect data for contaminants in drinking water from public community water systems and all non-transient, non-community water systems. And those are the changes.
and since that was a new term to me when we first talked about it, non-transient, non-community water systems, can you briefly explain what such a thing is? Maybe by example.
I'm just going to read the definitions. No, I don't have, I'm not put it in here. Basically,
Green book,
yeah, if I could get the green book, that would be great.
it's in 10.
Thanks. All right, so a public water system is any system or combination of systems owned or controlled by a person that provides drinking water through pipes or other constructed conveyance to the public and that has at least 15 service connections or serves an average of at least 25 individuals for at least 60 days a year. Right, so that's the default public water system. Then a community water system is a public water system that serves at least 15 service connections used by year-round residents or regularly serves at least 25 year-round residents. Okay? Now, a non-community water system means a public water system that is not a community water system. Yay. And there are 2 categories of non-community systems. Non-transient systems, those are systems that serve 25 or more of the same people daily for more than 6 months in a year. And transient systems are all other non-community public water systems.
So that's clear now.
So the example that we were talking about would be like a private lake association might have its own water system.
Right. So yes, the transient ones they're limited in duration. They don't operate for more than 6 months in a year, and so the concern is how do you have them testing at these intervals when they may not even be operating? And so what you're requiring is for the community, public community water systems and the non-community, non-transient ones, those that are there more than 6 months.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. O'Grady on these changes? And I'd like to ask you to stay there, and then we'll just take testimony or edit from the audience mode. So, Mr. Chapman, do you have any comments on this current draft?
The one comment that I had, Mr. Chairman, you had already picked up, which was the conforming date change from September to December on page 8, line 7.
beyond that, we don't have any changes. And then to respond to the question of why the date change, it came to my attention through conversations with the Department of Health that there are no labs in the state of Vermont certified to run 537.1, which gets you about 30 or so analytes for PFAS. They're all certified at 537, which has a reporting limit of 20 parts per trillion and test for about 14 PFAS. So there's going to be a need for laboratories to certify themselves to a more stringent standard, which is going to take time, and we're working with VDH to do that.
And so, Ms. Dutton, do you have any? I figure, well, let's do these point by point and work through the changes. So,
I don't have any additional comments or concerns with the legislation.
okay, great. So, we need to move that date to be practicable about implementing, then let's make that change. So then we would do that conforming change on page 8, where September 1, 19 becomes December 1. Okay. The other substantive conversation we had around the bill was on the TOPA, the total oxidizable phosphate assay. I'm able to find that section.
PG.
Thank you. Okay. So, from your 2 points of view, I mean, we were doing some back and forth between can we use it, is it reliable, and so I'd like to hear from both parties on terms of does this seem like a workable compromise to keep on trying to expand what we can do for testing, but do it in a way that is manageable.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for doing that work outside of the room thing and come back with a suggestion. So committee, are there any other questions about those edits or the bill as further amended with that one date change? If not, then be looking for a motion to remove the bill.
So moved.
I'm sorry, do you need to amend the original?
Yes.
Okay.
So first we need a motion to amend the bill and then a motion to move the amended bill.
I'll move to amend it.
Okay, thank you. So Senator Parent moves amended bill. Any further discussion on amending the bill? If not, motion call roll.
Senator McDonald?
Yes.
Senator Parent?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Senator Campion? Yes. Senator Bray?
Yes.
So this is to amend.
I move we report the bill favorably as amended.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Any further discussion? Okay. Senator Campion, take it away.
Senator McDonald?
Yes.
Senator Parent?
Yes.
Senator Rogers?
Yes.
Senator Campion? Yes. Senator Bray?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, committee. So I'll be happy to report the bill unless there's anyone who would like to do that. So I'll report. Thank you to everyone in the room who's kept pace with the steady and relatively, ambitious schedule of edits together. All right, so now we have Mr. O'Grady's help, and it's 45 minutes or so. I'd like to change gears and go to our next draft of S.96. Everyone should have it. It's draft 3.1, dated 2/28, timestamp 8/28. And,
I think Jude must have picked them up.
pardon me?
I think Jude must have picked them up because mine is no longer on my desk. Unless there's a new copy under. No, that's 49.
And Judith left the room. So, we'll
I think she's probably going to get copies.
get copies.
I sent it to her basically at 8:20 a.m. So
Take a momentary pause. Quiz the last week of session. Anyone can define public water supply, community water supply, public non-community water supply, transient and intransient water supply. Wait, it's a free dinner.
it was my second favorite definition, but it's now probably my first. Favorite was amended.
What was your favorite?
The definition of bovine livestock diseases. It was like anthrax, blue tongue, and like it was like a list of punk bands.
So, Jude, do you have a copy with you?
Senator,
No, of the bill.
I gave it to you. Not really, it's right here. I had to go get the amendment, that's why I stepped out of the room.
Nope.
Okay, great.
So, Mr. O'Grady, if you can give us a tour of the the changes since last time, that'll be helpful.
Sure. On page 2, line 3, the cross-reference to 924, it was changed from 924C to 924D. That's where the list of the eligible projects are, or categories are. On page 2, line 9, it had previously said the load reduction per unit or per best management practice class or category, and class or category was struck. So it's just per the BMP. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Page 3, line 11, and the determination of the standard cost. The agency asks that it's a standard cost per unit of pollutant reduction, and then it asks to strike achieved by a clean water project per unit or per BMP. So they just want it to be a determination of the standard cost per unit of pollution reduction.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of Matt? On that point, cost per pollution reduction, do we have figures from the agency as to how much we've spent and how much we've reduced phosphorus to date?
We have information on how much we've spent, not sort of correlated like this, but yes.
Could you bring that
Yep.
in, get it to the committee? I'd be interested to see that.
I think you have it. I think it's in the investment report that was given to the committee earlier
Okay.
on, but I'll check. When I get back to the office, I'm happy to
Thank you.
The investment report does have.
It does.
Should I move on?
Yes, please.
On page 4, line 13, this is just to clarify that it's when the secretary publishes a methodology for calculating pollution reduction values for a listed water, it's going to be those values associated with the clean water project in that water. Page 5, line 6, similar change. The person is proposing a clean water project for which no pollution reduction value design life exists for a listed water. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
On page 7, line 12, there had been a typo. It had said clean water service provided. It should say provider. On page 8, in the subsection regarding identifying, prioritizing, and selecting an activity, there's that list, lines 3 through 10, and you wanted to be clear that that is not a priority list, so it says may consider in no particular order of priority funding clean water projects in the following sectors. There was also the conversation about adding roads as eligible activities, and so on page 8, line 4, I believe it was the agency, I'm not exactly sure who recommended it, to say municipal roads. I don't know why it's municipal as opposed to all roads. And so I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Let's keep going and then come back to that one.
On page 9, line 4, this was Senator McDonald's, just one of Senator McDonald's concerns yesterday. They were going to report on their progress, and there was concerns about that word, and so it just says that the provider shall report annually, and the report shall contain. Moving on to page 10. Line 17 through 18, the grant amount used to say that 15%, no more than 50% shall be used for indirect or administrative costs. I think you heard concerns from some of the potential providers about indirect costs and not being able to quantify them, and that they wanted that structure.
We'll check back in with agency on that from there. Thank you. Let's keep going.
Page 10, line 19, the grant in sub D used to be called the Ecosystem Restoration Grant, which was causing great consternation with people who are getting an ecosystem services grant from A&R right now. They thought that they would be losing out on that. So it's a different grant. And so we're going to name it something that doesn't create confusion. So it's the Water Quality Enhancement Grant. John Rogers. On page 11, lines 2 through 5, there was the issue of how they were going to make these awards and whether or not there needed to be regional equity and whether or not there needed to be a consideration of the best bang for the buck, for lack of a better term. And so what's added is when making awards under the program, the secretary shall consider, not bound, just shall consider the cost effectiveness / bang for the buck of an award and the funding needs of each phase.
And the funding needs of each basin.
Right, so if a basin doesn't have any needs, they shouldn't be getting an award, correct? But if they have extreme needs, then they will likely get more
Extreme
money.
awards.
So,
On this subject, there are things you can spend money on now that have shown results in the immediate near future, which certainly ought to be we would all recently we expect that they be applied to places of great need. And then there were other activities, what I would call soft activities, that don't require capital construction, but deal with soil and land use improvements that might take 5, 10, 12 years to make appreciable but meaningful differences. I wouldn't prohibit some geographic recognition of having those applied starting at the beginning as long as they didn't impinge upon shovel-ready immediate needs. I don't know how to put that in the statute.
So let's talk about, there's now 4 grant programs in this section, right? There's the first, the water quality restoration. You got listed water. Now because it's listed, that basin gets an allocation and has responsibility to meet that allocation with the money that it receives based on the standard cost of reducing the pollution reduction. So that's like, they get that money and it may deal with those shovel ready, but it also may deal with those longer term soil practices or other things that aren't necessarily shovel ready right now. So they have opportunities to deal with that in that listed water. Outside of the listed water, there's the water enhancement grants, right? So it's not hinged on being in an impaired water. It may be used to improve or maintain water quality in a water that is not impaired. So again, shovel-ready or non-shovel-ready project could be used. The next is for the stormwater, the stormwater implementation grant program, and that's going to be for the 3-acre or more impervious surface, right? And potentially. And then there's a new one, it's Municipal Stormwater Assistance Grant Program to help municipalities with all of their stormwater permitting requirements. So that's another one where it's both shovel-ready and long-term. There are board programs now to give assistance in a basin for shovel-ready and for non-shovel-ready for impaired and non-impaired waters, for roads and for 3-acre impervious surface. I think you've got the basis covered in programs to make awards.
Just trying to figure out how to get some places on third base.
Well, that's helpful to hear it laid out that way. So while you're thinking about stealing third, if we continue our cruise, I'm a little concerned we'll run out of time to get to the amendments.
So,
But we still have a date till we're coming back to this to vote. So if you think you're mulling this over, I don't want to blow off what you're saying anyway. Just keep thinking about it and we'll have a chance to amend before we would vote.
on page 11, lines 3 through 5, there was concern that the limitation on the use of administrative costs wasn't flowing through all of the grant programs. So now that language is being attached to all the grant programs. You'll see that on page 11, lines 13 through 15 for the Stormwater Implementation Grant Program as well. There is another change that was made in the Stormwater Implementation Grant Program on page 13, following that reference to 1264G3. There used to be a reference to municipal implementation of stormwater under 1264. That is now sub-T, right? Instead of it being combined in the Stormwater Implementation Grant Program, there is now a separate program for municipal stormwater systems to provide grants to any municipality required to obtain a permit pursuant to section 1264 of this title. So that's all stormwater permits, right? So it's MS4, it's multi-sector general permit, it's operational permit, it's municipal roads, it's 3 acres. So if a municipality is required to get any of those permits, this is available to help them. However, it's only available in basins where a clean water service provider has met its annual goals or is making sufficient progress. And that is consistent with what the agency has been proposing all along. Don't give the basin the money until they're actually meeting their goals to do regulatory programs. So that's, it's an incentive to do your non-regulatory, the clean water projects that are not already required in order to get that reduction load. Once you do that, well then you get the money to do your regulatory programs.
Does that make sense?
I just, you gave a list of activities, and one of them was municipal roads. Is the basin planning governance structure going to be able to put on its list of things to be done, municipal roads, which are, and thereby draw money from the transportation fund, share municipal roads, so is there going to be that overlap of authority, or can they recommend municipal roads until the cows come home, but that remains the money remains the authority of transportation?
So the advisory council has one member from, at least one member from every municipality that's located in the basin. As I'm sure you have all heard, because I have heard it a lot, is that the municipalities, many of them don't like the municipal roads general permit. And I think if you have that number of municipalities on a basin advisory council, they are going to figure out a way to get funding for their municipalities to do the municipal stormwater roads program. Whether it's from transportation, whether it's from A&R, after the basin has met its reduction goals, or elsewhere. They probably, I think you've now created this entity that can kind of capitalize on all of their experience and interest. And it's a little frightening in some respects for me. But I think that they will be doing that kind of work. You're going to have a lot of people that have this experience, and they're going to be meeting semi-regularly and talking about these and trying to figure it out. And they're going to be staffed by whoever the clean water service provider is. I think you're going to see a lot of potential innovation and a lot of funding innovation as well.
So my question was, does this, other than sheer efforts of persuasive moral leadership, are they going to have the authority to take money from one municipal road money or aid or grants from the transportation agency to their watershed versus someone else's?
Municipalities have that authority, yes. They already do.
Brookfield can take Randolph's money, or?
No, the municipalities can apply for their own money and actually don't even need to apply. It's just a formula.
I'm not asking my question artfully, because
I think you're asking if the basin can reallocate Brookfield to Northfield. And that is not how the Agency of Transportation's funding authority works in statute right now.
Is that because Brookfield's,
Right.
is it a different basin in 50% of the Northfields, or because Is that because they're in different basins, or
Well,
were they in the same basins, would you have the same answer?
First, remember that those are regulatory programs, right? The Stormwater Municipal Roads program, that's a regulatory program. They don't get funding for that until they've achieved in the basin the pollution reduction goals. Town highway aid is unrelated to the pollution reduction goals. Town highway aid is straight up, you get it every year based on the formula.
Okay, so, but if upgrading roads got you more, saved you more phosphorus per dollar than other things, and in the list here, it has municipal roads as one of the.
Right, so if you want to go over and above that regulatory requirement and you think the basin thinks that they can do something over above the regulatory requirement that exceeds that regulatory requirement or is not required, and it will achieve a pollutant load reduction as a approved clean water project, they can do it. With money
With
that's
money.
separate from the town highway.
They go to the state coffers and get it from.
They're already getting that grant each year.
That's the formula, so many miles, whatever gets you
That's
so many
town
dollars.
highway aid they get for potholes, repaving, enhancements, which are sidewalks, etc., bike lanes. Now they're getting another called the watershed restoration grant, right? And that's based on what projects they are doing in order to meet the reduction goals in that basin. And they can use that money for any of the eligible list of projects, and roads is now on that eligible list of projects.
So in the opening, in the first couple of years, the Missisquoi Basin as being a prime area, they would get road money, but somewhere else in the state wouldn't get road money because somewhere else in the state's basin isn't as polluting as, which the road money should go to the Missisquoi Basin first.
Town highway money, everybody gets town highway money, right?
And the same formula.
Everybody gets road money, right? Under Title 19, everybody gets road money.
Sure. That's road money.
Right. Every basin's gonna get watershed restoration money, and they can use it for a road project that's in excess or not required of their clean water permit, right? So their repaving money is totally separate from what they could do on roads for stormwater, water quality underneath this program. Okay? So Brookfield's gonna go out and they're gonna repave and maybe they're gonna put in a new culvert. And the basin knows about that and they're saying, hey, if you do this in addition, then that'll get a pollutant load reduction and we'll pay you to do that in addition. They use their town highway aid to do their repaving and the new culvert. They use their water shed restoration money to do the additional thing. And you get a load reduction and everybody's happy.
So
Except
you're going to get the additional stuff from a different fund. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Let's continue our tour.
All right, so page 11, I think we just talked a lot about the Municipal Stormwater Assistance Grant Program in sub D. It has the language about the use of the administrative cost on page 12. That lets you skip to page 15, line 11 and 12. There was a old reference to the Regional Planning Commission as being the ones with the obligations under the new chapter 37, subchapter 5, so it's changed to Clean Water Service Provider. On page 17, In the language regarding what the Clean Water Board shall do, there's new language that directs the board to determine that if there are insufficient funds, they're going to direct the Secretary of Natural Resources to prioritize the work needed. It had previously said each basin, but there was some concerns that that would allow the Secretary to just do some individual basins, but not every basin. But now it says needed in every basin. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
On page 18, there's a change that was struck, but it's not highlighted. It's on between lines 8 and 9. There had been a directive for the board to review and approve the cost share for grant programs administered by state agencies. Frankly, that's really your job. And so, moving on from there, on page 19, line 1, there has been another reference to the regional planning commissions. So grants to regional planning commissions was changed to grants to clean water service provider. Page 19, line 9, you changed the title of the restoration grant program from ecosystem restoration to water quality restoration. And then on page 19, line 13, you moved investment in watershed planning up. We've got a request to do that to make that more higher in the priority. And then on page 20, some additional programs or activities were added for funding for education, outreach, demonstration, and implementation of RAPs and best management practices on ag land, so education to farmers. And then page 20, lines 6 through 7, funding for the Municipal Stormwater Assistance Grant. So that stormwater regulatory programs, once the basin has met its pollution reduction goals. And then page 20, line 8 and 9, funding for education and outreach generally regarding implementation of water quality requirements. On page 20, lines 15 and 16, funding for the Stormwater Implementation Grant Program. That is new because it's now a new program that was separated out from the Municipal Stormwater Assistance Grant. And that then leads you to page 23. This is language addressing the concerns that how does an RPC or clean water service provider ensure that the grant is being conducted effectively? How do they enforce? So in carrying out the duties of being a clean water service provider, the Regional Planning Commission shall adopt guidance for subgrants that establishes a policy for how the commission will issue subgrants to other organizations in the basin, giving due consideration to the expertise of those organizations and other requirements for the administration of the program. So how they're going to get money out to all the watershed associations and natural resource conservation districts, et cetera. And the subgrant guidance shall be subject to the approval of the Basin Water Quality Advisory Council. So the people that are getting the money are on the council. They have to approve the guidance. And then when selecting projects, the Regional Planning Commission shall prioritize projects identified in the basin plan for the area where the project is located and consider the pollutant targets provided by the Secretary and the recommendations of the Basin Water Quality Advisory Council. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
On page 25, there's a new section 8 that's added. It's a report from the Secretary of Natural Resources to you with recommendations regarding implementation of a market-based mechanism that allows the purchase of water quality credits by people that are permitted under the water quality chapter.
Great, thank you very much. And just so the committee knows, tomorrow morning, Laura Petro and Ryan Patch will be in to report a nutrient Mr. Howe was in here from Nutrient talking about that kind of trading program, and they've already received 2 grants from Ag, so I asked Ag to go over and report out what's been going on so we can better understand that kind of a program, which I think is relatively early stage. So the language here, I think my intent was that it's a way to move forward without, even though we're not, I'd say, not sure yet, we know really how to implement such a program. But to recognize it and set us up to be in a better place next year in order if we want to do that. I want to switch at 1:15, so that gives us 1 minute to just check in. Mr. Chapman, do you want to say anything about high level or in detail? We'll have a chance tomorrow to do it in detail, but I want to allow 15 minutes for the amendment before we lose Mr. O'Grady.
Well, I will ask and
Okay.
bring, I mean, any comments candidly at this point are just tiny little issues that I can speak with Mike on that I probably miss when I send him some edits, so some cleanup things.
Right, and Charlie Baker sent some technical stuff and some non-technical stuff.
So we've been doing pretty successful sort of trio editing. If I could schedule time to meet with the 2 of you and nail down a clean copy.
I made Charlie Baker's, both of you had already made most of Charlie Baker's technical.
Okay.
And then I made the 1 or 2 that weren't made already. There are non-technical, and I did not make those changes.
Okay, so if I can reach out after this, connect with the 2 of you to see if we can rendezvous later today. I have one very quick question. On page 2, under standard costs, it talks about approved load reduction per unit or per best management practice. So I was just not quite following why this sort of generic formula, whatever apply load reductions to a best management practice, if they may vary by basin. Like, why don't you hand out a load allocation and then it's their own adventure to figure out how to get there? You know what I mean? If that question doesn't make sense, I'll save it for later.
I'm not sure that I appreciate the question.
Okay, well, I don't doubt that. But so, okay, we'll get together and I'll just check. Maybe that I don't fully understand the formula. So with that, let's shift gears. Sir McDonald?
May I ask one more question? I'm trying to understand the language on page 19, which deals with clean water service provider grants. And it says there'll be at least a certain dollar figure on line 9 and 10.
Right, so yesterday,
Maybe ask my question. Is it assumed that if there are 14 such districts that each district will get a grant, or may a district get several grants?
so the restoration grant program, and actually, should that say enhancement?
That was one of the typographical.
All right, so this is the enhancement program, not the restoration program. This is a competitive grant program. So not every basin is guaranteed to get a grant under this program. Does that answer your question?
May a basin get 3 grants?
I think that's probably technically possible, but I think probably the basin's going to apply for a block grant.
It wouldn't apply for 5.
I think it's possible that they could say, hey, we're going to apply for a grant for this project, and that project. But if I'm the basin, grant applications are not easy.
I just don't, there's a floor on how much.
There's a floor that's in this general fund for this program, right? So, and honestly, you know that you don't have to agree to that in a future General Assembly.
At least this amount.
Right, so the Clean Water Fund Board Clean Water Board makes recommendations to the General Assembly. And what this is saying is that in its recommendations, they are recommending that they will have to recommend that at least 1.5 is made available for the Water Quality Enhancement Grant Program. The Water Quality Enhancement Grant Program,
Not pervasive.
not pervasive,
Okay.
for the
Okay.
program
Okay.
as a whole.
Thank you. Sorry it took so long. Thank you.
It's okay.
So, Mr. O'Grady, if we can all turn to draft Municipal 19, draft 121, 22519, 1:32 PM, sections A through D, 4 proposals of amendment to S.96, and give us a 3-minute walkthrough of what's here. Some of this language will seem quite familiar to you, I think.
May I just ask a question? It doesn't have a draft request number, so I'm trying to put it in the naming that prompt. Do you have a suggestion?
It doesn't have a draft number.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Should I list it under S.96?
I think that's up to the chair.
Yes. Go ahead. Well, yeah, it's,
All right, thank you. I'm sorry. People want to see it.
okay, so we'll sort that out after. But we want to make sure we have the ability to talk about it and vote so that we can keep editing. So if you could just high level spell out the 4 proposals of amendment, please.
So let's skip to section B first, because section A is really just definitions of section D.
Okay.
So section B adds a new section in 6 VSA Chapter 215, the Ag Water Quality Requirements. It is requirements for nutrient management plans. It first requires on page 3, lines 3 through 8, that nutrient management plans identify all surface inlets located on a farm and all known tile drainage on a farm. And then if a surface inlet or tile drain is installed after creation, revision, or update to a nutrient management plan, the location of the inlet or tile drain shall be included within or attached to the nutrient management, nutrient management plan as an addendum. And then before January 1, 2020, the owner or operator of a farm required to maintain a nutrient management plan under the chapter, which is pretty much all large farms who already submit their plans, all medium farms. Medium farms need to make their plan available to the secretary when requested, but that they don't currently require to submit them. And all certified small farms need to have a nutrient management plan as well. They will need to submit an electronic copy of the nutrient management plan to the agency. So basically, all farms will submit a nutrient management plan to the agency. And then, notwithstanding the authority of the secretary to withhold identifying information under 6 VSA Section 61, a nutrient management plan shall be available for public inspection and copying. However, on page 3, lines 18 to 21, there is a federal law that says when a nutrient management plan is funded with NRCS dollars, persons who are cooperators with NRCS, which arguably includes the Agency of Agriculture, must maintain certain identifying information as confidential. So when the Secretary of Ag receives a request to inspect or copy a nutrient management plan, the Secretary shall redact information that's protected from disclosure under that federal law.
Currently, are the nutrient management plans obliged to be sent electronically to the
No.
agency? So my intention of the amendment is not that they be required to be a new requirement to send all your nutrient management plans to the agency. The requirement is if you got one at home in your 3-ring binder that you're required to have by law, which you are currently.
Yes.
Okay, so that 3-ring binder would have in it a list of where these things are. I'm not trying to have a new reporting requirement of electronic to the agency. I'm trying to have the existing nutrient management plan to include the location of tile drains and surface drains. And that's my intention, and I apologize.
That's what subsection A does, but I also thought you wanted them to be public.
Who has access to those?
Right now, the Agency of Agriculture. And
So
really,
today, the Agency of Agriculture doesn't have access to them.
the Agency of Agriculture is in possession of the nutrient management plans for large farms because that's a requirement of the large farm rule.
And that's electronic?
Actually, no, some do electronic, some send the hard copy.
Okay, I'm not trying to change the way or the requirement of who has to provide the Agency of Agriculture with a nutrient management plan. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to change that
then they're
when you
not.
are obliged to do it, that you include these two items.
Then they're not public then because records that are produced or acquired by a public agency become public records. If they're not produced or acquired by the agency, they're not a public record. So an agency,
Even though the agency has them.
if the agency has them, they've acquired them. If they're just on the farm and the agency says, hey, can I look at your plan? They still haven't acquired them. So they're still not a public record.
Okay, well then let's skip over this one for now.
Okay.
Well, I, as stated, have to step out, but I don't support this, and if it's in the bill, I can't support the bill. So I just wanted the committee to know that before I step out.
Okay. Let's go on and just revisit
Okay.
what else is here.
All right, so section C relates to a harvest notification for landowners that are in the current use program. You'll see on page 6 that it is a requirement for forest land for the owner file a notice of intent to cut with the department. The county requires at least 15 days before commencing a harvest activity that would be included in a management activity report under subdivision 2. They're already required to put in an annual report of management activity.
It's retroactive, right?
Yes.
So,
Right.
yeah,
It's not prospective.
that's not germane to this discussion.
Right.
I'm not interested in
Right.
adding to what you report that you've already done. I'm interested in having a notification that it's going to take place in the near future.
Right, but you also said that you didn't want like the minor like trimming to be, so this is something that qualifies as something, their management activity under their plan that they have to submit. And prior to them engaging in that, they have to give the 15 days notice. And they have to give all the information that is listed on page 6, their name, address, physical address, and identification number, which is, they get an identification number if they're in current use. The name of the logger or contractor conducting the harvest and his contact information, the location of the timber harvest, including the town and nearest highway used to access the harvest, the date of the harvest will commence and the estimated date it will be completed, and the estimate of the acreage of the timber harvest area, and the estimate of the volume of the timber harvest area. Now, if it's a heavy cut, 40 acres or more, this is consistent with what they have to report for the heavy cut. And it's 15 days in advance as well. And it's a form that they have to give the department as well. So you're not duplicating the heavy cut requirement, it's basically the same thing.
And then section D takes,
Section D, whenever you add a criteria to use value, you have to define what makes that land not eligible anymore. And what makes any land in current use not eligible is development. And so you add a definition of what constitutes development. This section has many things that do not intuitively seem to be development. like not complying with the required agricultural practices after a report from the secretary, that is development. That's really not development in anyone's intuition,
Right.
but that's how it's
That's
defined.
the trigger.
And here, failing to provide your notice of harvest 2 or more times in any 3-year period would be development.
So I know we're about to lose you, but thank you for walking us through. So, Mr. McDonald, if you want to explain the rationale for any of these proposals, that would be helpful.
Gladly. We're spending a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort in cleaning up the damage done to the waters of the state, and there are practices that are, in each of these cases, there's an attempt to prevent stuff that we would eventually have to clean up after. And we've been, I think, remiss in focusing all on cleanup when there are opportunities to prevent things from happening. One of the things that I didn't include in here was pricing having to do with how much phosphorus you bought in feed and fertilizer from out of state and put on your land. I think it's silly and imprudent to spend a host of money cleaning up after phosphorus when you haven't made any effort to decrease the amount of phosphorus coming in by some sort of pricing. That's not in here. But to have forestry, which forests are the best way to treat stormwater that exists, and 3 times or 4 times a century, harvesting is the worst way to increase stormwater pollution when the harvests are not conducted properly, and there's no notification for when the inspectors might make unannounced visits to harvests that are taking place. The only way it gets reported is if a neighbor says something is going on, or if after the activities have taken place, it gets reported in February of every year, and that's too late. So these would be measures designed to slow down pollution through reporting ahead of time.
Since Mr. O'Grady needs to leave shortly.
I actually have an hour free, so.
Oh, all right. So let's do you can just take quick questions. All right. Thank you.
I have a suggestion of tightening up the language on the reporting that makes it clearer, and a couple of typos, but I wouldn't waste anybody's time on that until the notion of what these are proposed are accepted by the committee. So.
Any questions for Senator McDonald?
No, I'm with Senator Rogers. I couldn't support the amendment or the notion of it in any capacity, and ultimately would pull my support from the bill if it was included as well.
Sarah Campy, any thoughts?
This checks off a lot of boxes for me, actually. No, I like it. I do. My concern is it leaves here, it's just going to get stripped out down the hall. I don't know if there's a way to make it a separate committee bill or something like that, but this is, as I've said all along, Senator McDonald's right. I mean, this is preventing certain pollutions from happening that in the end we end up cleaning up. But it has to get some agreement, I think, down the hall that we're gonna do it. But yeah, I like it.
So my concern is really logistical. If we include provisions relating to tidal drains and nutrient management plans, the agriculture committee will have, I would feel if I were, just like they have a wetlands bill, I'm asking them to refer it to us even though they need not to, because this committee has a legitimate interest, jurisdiction around wetlands, shared with ag in some way. So I would return them the favor by saying we should refer this bill, and we're under a crossover deadline, and my understanding is we won't see this bill out of ag prior to crossover. Double check with Senator Starr. So my concern is not about content so much as what it does to our clean water bill at this moment.
Well, our clean water bill appropriates money or sets the mechanisms for appropriations. Or letting someone else come up with the taxing for it. And we're not, there never seems a proper time to regulate behaviors which lead to the pollutions. One of the unique things about Franklin County, when you go to the Missisquoi Valley, the report is that if you're in the Missisquoi Valley and you dig down to find topsoil, you got to get down well over a foot, because topsoil, you have to get through over a foot of silt just to get to topsoil. And that's what does that say about our forestry practices and the enforcement thereof? So it's, as the Committee of Natural Resources, we always have a reason why we're not protecting natural resources, but we're supportive of the idea of paying money to clean up after things that we are reluctant to regulate.
Well, I mean, I agree with the stitch in time saves nine. And if we stop the fouling of waters, then it's way more cost effective than cleaning them up. And who wants the foul waters to have to, that you know, with why you're doing the cleanup?
Apparently some people.
Logged 100 years ago. You're not changing that practice now.
So the
I'm not
pathway I
looking for
was
reparations, I'm looking for ending slavery from now on.
They don't log up there like you think.
the other thing is, so, I would say, on the other hand, I would give you my assurance that may not make the difference now, but that we would come back. I mean, I would want to take testimony on these things before I would just move them along anyway, just from a process point of view. So it'll be hard to have that kind of testimony prior to voting and still making crossover. There is a forestry fragmentation bill that I requested reintroduction of. We saw it as H233 last session. I think it's still in the works. Bills are backlogged, as people know. Also, it said it wasn't a front burner bill request because there have been so many things that we're pressing. So this would seem like a place where certainly the forestry practices part of this bill could naturally find a home for discussion.
Where's that bill?
So we'll see it in the second half of the session.
Coming from the other body?
No, it'll be introduced here.
You might get it from the other body in the Act 250 bill because 233 has been incorporated into the Act 250.
And then talking with the chair, I think there's uncertainty as to what we'll see when on it, so I thought it would be good to have our own
Understood.
piece. The other thing too is if we've moved it, we could harmonize it later with the Act 250. It would let us work on a subset of issues that we've spent a lot of time on before. All right, well, with that, then I would say I would look for a motion to either adopt these, a motion to consider adoption of these amendments to S.96.
I'll have a motion to amend the bill or not after I've spoken to Mr. O'Grady about some of the language in a couple of the areas. We'll have that tomorrow.
Okay, so you'd rather have you may have amended language and we can consider it.
We'll find some of this.
Okay.
But I've heard the message, so I don't know what the outcome is likely to be.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Thanks for continuing to work on it. We'll see it again tomorrow. And then the goal is to vote S.96 tomorrow. Thank you for your work on 49. I'll check in with Mr. O'Grady and Mr. Chapman for some additional smaller edits to 96, so we'll have a new version for voting tomorrow. And we have 6 minutes left of a break before we hear from the Regulatory Assistance Project on work that was scheduled to come to us months ago. It's landed here shortly. So it's going to be on carbon management related practices. Maybe 45 minutes of that, and then we have committee time again. So I would run for the exits now because
Did you text that article? Did you text that article?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I couldn't really see that, so
we're shifting gears, and this past previous session, as part of carbon management, carbon pricing, carbon discussions, 2 research projects were kicked off in response to all that. One was we had the Resources for the Future group presenting in January an analysis and report. And our neighbors, the Regulatory Assistance Project, also known as RAP, who live right down the street, have been looking into the same issue for us to help us learn more and think about options that we have. So if that's not the right introduction, please feel free to add some more.
That was terrific, and thank you very
It
much,
was really
Chair.
fabulous. I mean, Bray.
Could you journalize those remarks?
My name's Rick Weston. I'm a principal of the Regulatory Assistance Project. I and my colleagues, Rich Cowart and David Farnsworth, are here to testify today, and thank you very much for having us. Rich and Dave will be here in seconds.
Yeah, you know they're not behind you, right?
Yeah, they're not behind. They'll be here immediately, and I'm sitting in, at this point, for Rich. We have a 3-part presentation to give to you. So I'm going to be the understudy for the first part for now, if that's okay. Again, my name is Rick Weston. I'm with the Regulatory Assistance Project. We're a nonprofit that advises governments on clean energy policy, particularly in the regulated energy sectors, natural gas and electricity primarily. I've been with RAP for nearly 20 years, and before that was a hearing officer and economist with the Public Service Board, now the Public Utility Commission, excuse me. And until last year was the director of our China program. It's nice to be able to work at home. So I'm just waiting for Rich to come in, and I can hand it over to him. But let me start. Chairman, as you rightly reported, we were asked by JFO to take a look at the RFF study, respond to it, give it some thought, and then come in with some of our own thoughts about what might be done in the way of complementary policies, what RFF referred to as non-pricing policies, but complementary programs that could be considered and implemented here in Vermont for the purpose, of course, of advancing carbon savings, getting us on our trajectory to the stated goals that the legislature has for carbon reductions in the state. What we did is work with 2 consulting groups, 2 analytical groups. One is M.J. Bradley and Associates. They're in Massachusetts. They've done a great deal of work on transportation policy, programs for electrification of vehicles and so on, around not only the region but the nation. And with Energy Futures Group, which is located here in Heinsberg, Vermont, an efficiency and power sector consulting firm, to look at opportunities in the heating sector, the building sector, for reducing carbon. So,
So those are our two largest greenhouse gas emitters.
Well, and that's exactly what one of our charts will show you, is that transportation and heat are the largest carbon emitters in Vermont, because our electric sector is already relatively low in carbon. So, here are my colleagues, Rich Gallagher and David Farnsworth. Rich, I'll hand it over to you for, I'm just about to do the carbon abatement.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Sorry, we've just been in different rooms.
Well, it's nice to be popular here.
So, for the record, I'm Rich Cowart, a principal at the Regulatory Assistance Project, and by way of background, I was for 12 years chair of the Public Service Board, now the Public Utilities Commission in Vermont. For 6 years, I chaired the Electricity Advisory Committee of the U.S. Department of Energy. For 10 years, I've been setting up and running a program on clean energy in Europe. And I've been for many years a member of the board of directors of Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, and serve in a number of other capacities, but all related to energy, utilities, and the environment.
A great resource just down the street from us that sometimes the State House doesn't remember exists.
And we are a global resource, actually, as you've probably heard from Red. So I'm drawing your attention to a carbon abatement curve, which is the third slide, I guess. And I guess I should start by just asking, have you seen curves like this before? This committee's? Okay. So if you looked at a carbon abatement curve, you know that on the left-hand side, there are shown there the potential for large quantity of carbon emissions reductions that save money, but basically cost less to deliver than they save. And we're not strangers to this at Vermont, because we have had efficiency programs for a long time. And we originally did them just to save money. We didn't really identify carbon as the driver. We were more concerned in the days when we started, we were more concerned about SOx and NOx than we were about carbon. But we knew, when we started those programs, we had a little fudge factor in our thinking about sort of a placeholder for carbon reductions. Now, as time has gone by, carbon has risen to the top of the pile as things that we care about. Moving down to I want to give you a concrete example that kind of exemplifies our major conclusion. Our major conclusion has been that carbon pricing alone will cost more and achieve less than a sort of programmatic approach to carbon reduction that might use a modest amount of carbon revenues, but where the revenues are basically invested in programs instead of thinking of the revenue as the hammer that's going to drive change. So think of the revenue as enabling, not forcing. This chart shows you a conclusion that we have come to by studying the numbers in a bunch of places, that a programmatic approach to carbon reduction can save 7 to 9 times more carbon for the same amount of consumer spending as price alone.
Would you say that first part again? I'm sorry. What will do it?
A programmatic.
Programmatic, right. Thank you. That's all right.
And now I'm going to tell you the story that's behind this chart. This is based on real data from the United Kingdom, as it happens. But we've done this analysis in Ohio and other places.
You say United Kingdom or Northeast Kingdom?
United
Kingdom. Okay, so I'm not sure.
And the reason we have good data on this is that one of our colleagues in Europe was the president of something called the Energy Savings Trust, which is a government agency in the UK that did efficiency programs. So we asked the question, what if we had a 3% charge or tax or rate increase on natural gas in the UK? What would we get in terms of conservation and carbon reduction? That's the little blue wedge at the bottom of this chart.
Wow.
So because what's called the price elasticity of demand for natural gas, just like for fuel oil and gasoline and other similar things, is really low. So you can raise the price, you don't get much. So that's the blue wedge. Then we asked the question, what if you took the same amount of, this is GBP, it's Great Britain pounds. What if you took the same amount of dollars and invested them in a smart program to reduce emissions in the gas sector? What would you get? So since we had real data, we could actually do this analysis. They ran a program that gave incentives. It had an education component, it had an outreach component, it had an incentives component. They gave incentives to building owners and homeowners to buy down the cost of buying an efficient boiler, which is the heating, it's like their furnace, for hot water and space heat. What would it take to get owners to trade in their old boiler and get a new high-efficiency condensing boiler? And it ran that program across hundreds of thousands of homes. And what they got was all the savings underneath the red curve. And they actually showed a really significant decline in average household use of natural gas in the UK because of both weatherizing homes and putting in efficient boilers. And
Somebody just asked, how did they get that money? How did they get those dollars? Through the same process
it was
that they then gave
the
to
charge
people?
on utilities.
It was a charge on utilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gas utilities.
I'm loosely,
Yes.
Yeah, gas utilities.
right, gas utilities.
Right.
It's a little more complicated how they raise the money, but just think of
But
it
the bottom line.
it's coming from the utility sector to finance these programs.
Did that money that came, though, have a rate impact roughly comparable to the 3%?
The way they
will impact is the question.
You're asking a great question, and this is why I didn't answer your question exactly directly, because they have deregulated the utility sector. There's a kind of a debate going on as to whether the utilities absorbed some of those costs and didn't pass them all through, or whether they passed them all through. And let's just say, for the sake of, for the most part, I would say, sure, they probably paid 2 to 3% in rates in order to get these savings.
And then to Senator McDonald's point, they may have had a rate increase in effect of 2 to 3%, but they still may have net savings because their consumption declined in excess of what the rate increase would have delivered if they'd continued with the old boiler.
Correct.
Okay.
And quite substantially. Now, flipping the page, Vermont succeeds in efficiency first. You know, we're not strangers to this kind of analysis. We, in fact, have been doing this for more than 25 years. As you, I'm sure, know, through Section 248, efficiency is first. Energy efficiency dockets, efficiency Vermont, Vermont gas systems, Burlington Electric. We are delivering efficiency in the regulated sectors quite well. And we're among the leaders in the country. We used to be the leader, now we're just among the leaders. In a way that's great because that means other states have really gotten with the message as well. But what people often forget is how the efficiency resource adds up. That if you think about spending for something in the power sector today, you're just getting your power today. If you invest in efficiency today, you're getting savings next year, year after, over the life of the measure. And if you actually look at what we've done in Vermont, in the power sector, we spend today roughly 7% of the cost of service is devoted to efficiency. And over 90% is devoted to the supply side, so efficiency is still a small fraction. But that 7% has added up savings, whereas today it's providing more of an energy resource than wind, solar, biomass, methane combined. It's 20% of our power supply is coming from the results of what we've done on efficiency. And that's not something that we think of because it's not on the bill.
Right, like 20% megawatts or something.
Yes, 20% megawatts. Okay, just want to emphasize to you that not only is it 20% of our power supply, our energy service supply, if you think of it that way, it's $2.5 billion in net savings to Vermonters over the period that we've been doing this. So, okay, power sector, we're doing pretty well. The hard part is transportation and buildings. And you've probably seen data already from RFF on this. You know that that's where the emissions are in Vermont now, and that's the undertreated, those are the undertreated sectors. Next slide is showing you the answer to a question. I often get asked the question, how can we afford to spend money on efficiency? We just don't have the money. And then the truth is, we are spending the money. We're spending it on oil and gasoline and diesel. $2 billion a year we're sending out of state to buy those resources. And what I'm about is, frankly, trying to help Vermonters save as much of that as we can cost effectively. So that gets us down to the next question.
What's HH? I'm sorry.
Households, sorry. So 35,000, what I wanted to figure out is, okay, it's 2 times the size of the total agricultural economy in Vermont, more than 2. How does that translate to households? The median household income times 35,000 is, and I mean total income, not net, not take-home pay, would be devoted to paying our fossil bill. It's just a huge drain on the state. So we look at carbon a little differently than a lot of economists. Often, we are in these debates all over the world, and what you hear talked about is what's the carbon price? And what they mean is, in the carbon market, what's the price? Is it $10, $20, 13 euros? What is it? And I keep trying to get people to focus on how much is it costing per ton. The price only tells you a little bit of the story. So in a market, in the US, I modeled this or I built on a model that other people did to realize that when carbon was, if they asked the question, what would happen in the biggest power market in America, which is called PJM, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, goes all the way to Ohio, 17 states. If they had a $20 a ton carbon tax or a $20 a ton carbon market. And it turns out that in that power market, I forget the exact numbers, but it was hundreds of dollars. It would cost consumers, I think, 480, or depending on the price, 480 or 840 dollars per ton actually avoided because of the way the power markets work. Same thing is true in Europe. We modeled it for Europe, and we came up with extraordinarily high numbers. And the same thing was true for the modeling done for Vermont by Resources for the Future, which my colleague will tell you about. this is all leading me to the questions that I would like you to ask about carbon reduction. How many tons will it save? How fast? What's it going to cost consumers per ton avoided? And can we design programs that are fair to all Vermonters, including vulnerable communities and low-income households? And we can answer all those questions.
Can I ask a big picture question on the modeling or the math that goes into this? Does that math ever include the costs associated with the use of those fuels? So public health and environmental impacts, so that we stop only looking at one ledger and we look at the whole ledger.
We frequently do analysis that includes the health and environmental costs. And if we did, this chart,
Yeah.
the red space would fill up the whole chart. You know,
Which chart?
I'm sorry. In my the Great Britain example,
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating to say it would fill. Yeah, maybe it would fill up the whole chart. The point is that that analysis is not including the health and environmental benefits. Okay. It's just the dollar, in this case, pounds saved in bills. But you make a point that we make all the time, that what are called the non-energy costs often, or the non-economic costs, are often exceed the straight-up dollar cost savings.
I know that with some weatherization programs, for instance, they have found that the cost of weatherizing, there were savings achieved by it, but the cost of implementing was surpassed by the health savings of those whose homes were weatherized. So whether you'd save any energy was, you could write all that off and just say you had delivered a health program in the form of weatherization.
Have you heard about the New Zealand study on this? Is that?
No.
Oh, there's a great study from New Zealand on exactly this point. And the reason why I love the study is that they had data from their National Health Service, which they could track back to individual households. And across thousands of units, they were able to study the health effects of the weatherization program. And they had a control group of units that weren't treated and units that were treated under the weatherization program. And then they tracked the health savings. And they actually convinced the National Health Service that the weatherization program could have been justified to pay for the weatherization program entirely from the health service. So your point exactly is proven in a really good study.
If you could send us a link to something like that, that'd be great.
Yeah. I just want to yield the chair to my colleagues.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senators. My name is David Farnsworth. I've been at the Regulatory Assistance Project for about 10 years. I was a hearing officer and a staff attorney at the Public Service Board about 14 years before that. I'm going to talk to you this morning about the transportation side of this paper that RAP has produced for the Joint Fiscal Office. What I'd like to do is briefly just give you a sense of what the modeling approach that was adopted here, the few strategies we asked folks to look at, and to provide you with what we think are some positive takeaways from that work. We hired M.J. Bradley Associates. They do a lot of work on transportation and environment and transportation, carbon markets around the country. And they set up an analysis that took two approaches. They looked at business as usual for Vermont, and then they looked at an 80 by 50 strategy. How does the Vermont transportation sector reduce its emissions by 80% by 2050? In other words, how do we get at the roughly the 2030 and 2050 goals that have been adopted here in Vermont? The business as usual approach, not surprisingly, takes the uptake in electric vehicles that we see today, which is not bad compared to what we see around the country. It's not particularly aggressive. It looks at the current use of biofuels for conventional vehicles. It also looks at sort of a flat trajectory for federal CAFE standards, which are fleet efficiency standards. That's the business as usual approach. The 80 by 50 approach looks at electrification of all of Vermont's transportation. It looks at an uptake of biofuels, and it looks like at a more aggressive approach for CAFE standards. And there are quite remarkable differences. One of the things about modeling that anybody who asks somebody to model for them have to get their arms around is exactly what the assumptions are. So the big assumption here is that we're looking at the entire transportation sector for Vermont. Well, what does that mean? It's just a big average of semis, semi-trailer trucks all the way down to little Nissan Leafs, little tiny cars, okay? We asked, when they took that initial approach and modeled what it would cost to change all that transportation to electric transportation, what it would cost to make the entire transportation sector have the same cost as the conventional sector, it looked like an enormous lift, almost an impossible lift. But we know that there is a lot of activity around the world with respect to smaller vehicles. So we asked them, can you break out heavy duty, medium duty, light duty? They said, sure. I said, what does that look like? Well, there was actually very good news. The heavy duty and medium duty, not such good news, because what you have is power requirements for large trucks, and especially large trucks. The cost of batteries required to pull those, to do the work those trucks do, divided by 12,000 miles a year of transport, and you don't really have, you have an expensive undertaking. But when you look at the light duty vehicles, the story was remarkably different. By light duty, we're still averaging types. So it's F-150 type pickup trucks all the way down to subcompacts. So that's what we mean by light duty. What they found was that with about a little less than $7 million a year spent in the next 10 or 12 years out to 2030, that you could flip the market for light transportation in the state of Vermont. In other words, you could bring the cost of electric vehicles to a comparable level, the total cost of ownership of those vehicles to a comparable level of conventional vehicles. That's $70 million over 12 years. That would totally change the market. Corresponds to about 2 cents a gallon on diesel and gasoline. So when we stand back and look at the modeling that they've done, mid-size and heavy-duty vehicles continue to be a challenge, but that there's a great opportunity with respect to light-duty vehicles, and that Vermont could, with that level of effort, make a change that we think is really encouraging. I'm going to hand off.
Thanks. Again, Rick Weston with RAP, and thank you for having us. Very briefly, I want to describe the buildings or heating sector analyses that we did. We didn't take a look at every imaginable program or activity that you might want to think about to improve the energy efficiency of buildings in Vermont. But we did, given the time and resources constraints that we had. But so we lighted on 5 programs that we thought would be cost effective and would have other benefits, both obviously the carbon benefits, but also other public policy benefits associated with them. So there are 5 of them. There are weatherization programs for low income and non-low income. retrofitting of furnaces with cold climate heat pumps, electric heat pumps, obviously, and retrofitting water heating systems, domestic hot water systems with heat pumps as well, heat pump water heaters. And the fifth program that we looked at would be retrofitting school boilers, propane and oil boilers with advanced wood pellet systems. We felt that in the 10 years that we were looking at, we could get roughly 40 to 50% of the eligible markets. If you look at the slide there, number 12, it shows you how many units, how many schools we'd expect to get in that period of time, with a program of targeted incentives to advance the implementation, the adoption of these technologies. Okay. On this page, heating programs, costs and benefits. I don't want to spend too much time on it. There are a lot of numbers there, but we looked at these programs from two perspectives. The total cost to Vermont, in terms of both public dollars and participant dollars. So if I'm given an incentive to rip out my water heater to replace it with a heat pump water heater, the incentive is the public dollar, including the administrative costs of the program. And my participant costs are my share of the investment and, of course, my electric costs. And the benefits are the avoided propane or oil costs that I would have otherwise incurred if I kept my old technology. And in fact, one of the costs I avoid is replacing that technology some years down the road. Same thing for all these programs. In the case of the low-income weatherization program, all the public dollars cover all the costs. So for the low-income program, we assume that there would be no participant dollars for the weatherization because it's low. What you see here are in present value terms, the 10 years of the programs, all the costs, all the benefits from those two perspectives, looking at it from the total cost perspective and then just the program cost, the public dollar cost. Now these are not finely tuned program designs. We made assumptions about what the levels of incentives would have to be in order to affect these changes. But obviously when you're sitting down and really sharpening your pencil and designing these programs, you want to minimize the incentives, obviously, and still get the participation. And that would be a detailed program design consideration. In any case, what you see here in millions of dollars, 2018 dollars, discounted for inflation and for a real discount rate of 3%, you see the costs and benefits compared and benefit cost ratios calculated. In every case, these programs produce economic savings, and that's all we've looked at here, just the direct dollars. We didn't add in public health or other environmental benefits, and as Rich said, these numbers would change dramatically. We didn't do that for a number of reasons. Again, time constraints, but also we wanted to take a conservative approach to see just what the real dollar effects would be. And
on the citizens paying the bills.
Yes.
So you didn't take into account money being brought back into the state.
No.
Okay, so it's not that big.
We're saying,
Okay, go ahead.
Right. No. This isn't a secondary sort of macroeconomic analysis. There would certainly be benefits for, obviously in the building industry and so on. Multiplier effects, Senator, yes. So just a straight dollars saved. Every one of these programs saves Vermonters money. What that means, if you look at the bottom chart and the red numbers, red ink in this case is a good thing. What that means is that while saving Vermonters dollars, putting more money back in Vermonters' pockets, you're getting carbon reductions at no cost. Or in effect, you're getting them at negative cost. These negative numbers are the net benefits divided by the numbers of tons saved. And that means you're getting them for less than free. You're paying yourself to get carbon reductions, in effect, is what it means. That's the really good news. These are programs that you'd want to do for their economic benefits, and you get carbon along for the ride. It's a menu of programs. They do come with a hefty price tag, but their benefits are huge. So you get, they're worth more than they cost. So let me just finish up. On the next page, I've summarized, I've added it all up, all 5 programs. That's just the numbers for the aggregate of the programs. So if you had a revenue stream and you were to do it, over 10 years, it'd be over $500 million in program costs and over $900 million in savings. And that just, that's the aggregate number. And again, but it's the bottom chart that I want you to look at, I want to focus on. As Rich described earlier, there's a difference between putting a price on carbon that you emit and put into the atmosphere and a cost for every ton of carbon that you prevent from going into the atmosphere. So we talk about carbon pricing, we're putting a price on the carbon that we're emitting. When we talk about the cost of a ton avoided, how much did we pay to get that carbon out of the atmosphere? This graph, this table shows you the relative costs of tons avoided of 3 things. Heating and building strategies that I just described, the average avoided ton costs negative $142. For the light duty vehicle program that David described, the ton avoided over the life of the program, and it's important to understand that after 2030, this number would go down because electric vehicles then become even more cost-effective relative to conventional vehicles. That's $16 a ton. Okay, that's a positive number. That's what the program would be paying for this. But if you take a look at a pricing-only policy, as RFF did, they looked at 4 pricing-only policies. The lowest cost trajectory price, path price, is the WCI, the Western Climate Initiative projections for carbon prices over the next, in this case, 12 years. The behavioral changes that result from putting that price on carbon for that period of time causes reductions in carbon that cost $400 a ton. So that further illustrates Rich's point that pricing alone doesn't get you where you want to go, and what you do get costs a lot.
It may get you there, but it costs an arm and a leg.
So Rich?
So can I just check in on one thing? So AB 11 coined the term megawatts.
Yes, he did.
Are we talking here about megatons?
Yeah, exactly. In a sense, we're trying to, I think that's right. I have to think it all the way through, but yes, we are talking about
I think they're negatherms.
Negatherms. And the ton comes with it.
In each case, you're measuring apples.
Yes, you're trying to measure apples, exactly. Okay. Exactly. Great.
You've already heard the main conclusion, but I have 2 slides here of sort of additional points that I would like to draw your attention to. And the reason that we thought this would be useful to you is that frequently we're asked by legislators, what can we do now? What can we do that's a slam dunk? What can we do that doesn't require too heavy a lift in this building? And I feel a little conflicted about this because, frankly, I feel on the basis of all of our global work, the sort of urgency around climate, the urgency around energy waste, and I don't want to encourage going slow. I don't want to encourage just doing easy things. Nevertheless, we often get asked, where could we start? What would be a good thing to do? And so in that spirit, we have a list of recommendations that we believe are pretty straightforward. Compared to other places in the world where we work, Vermont has a serious advantage. We have experience in our own backyard to build on. We have the Weatherization Assistance Program. We already know how to do this job. We have Efficiency Vermont. We have Burlington Electric, Vermont Gas Systems, delivering energy efficiency programs over now decades. We know how to run those programs well. We have RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that shows us the value of carbon revenues when they're recycled for low carbon or carbon reductions. And so compared to a lot of other places in the world, we actually have a vocabulary where we can talk about building on those things. We don't have to talk to people about inventing. I'm going to Bosnia next week at the invitation of the Bosnian government to help them build an energy efficiency program. And they're starting from nowhere. We're going to Greece to help them do the same thing. The advantage we have in Vermont is that we could build on these programs tomorrow. So that's my starting point. The Weatherization Assistance Program is dramatically underfunded, always has been. We could do a lot better, and we could just build on it. We could at least double it. We should more than double it if we're going to get close to treating the 50,000 eligible untreated units that exist, at least existed in the state the last time we did the study. I'm looking at my colleagues here, including Riley Allen, who worked on that decades ago. Or I think 2011. Yeah. So,
well, by way of reassurance, so one of our first priorities post-crossover, we've been doing a lot of natural resource stuff first, and it's, our post-crossover, this is at the top of our energy list.
Good. I feel that the evidence is really good for that, and that opportunity is important. Now, here's a piece of this story that I almost apologize for having to bring up, but it's just time to talk about it. If you were to look, we have done a really good job on the regulated fuels, the electric efficiency programs, the Vermont gas programs, relatively speaking, have a great track record and ought to be continued. So let's sort of accept that they're working really well and we'd like to keep them going. But look at what's happening on the more difficult sector, which is the liquid fuels, or sometimes called the delivered fuels part of the energy picture. And that's the big wedge we're now talking about. The big wedge, well, we have transportation and heating, and the big wedge is on those unregulated fuels. And we have been unable, over all of this time frame, to build the kind of funding stream for weatherizing or for assisting in the thermal side by building on a revenue stream from those fuels compared to what we've done on electricity and gas. So the last time I looked, I haven't done a detailed study, but the last time I looked, I think that electricity is contributing to energy efficiency in Vermont at a rate 10 times higher than oil and propane, kerosene. And that's a mismatch. That's where the need is, and we're not getting rid of it. So one way or another, we need to solve that problem, and it, in my opinion, should be solved by tapping the revenue stream in the liquid fuels to fund energy efficiency devoted to the use of liquid fuels, the same way we've done for electricity and gas. And that is just something that we've collectively been unable to do, but that is now time to actually face up to.
Well, it seems like all your analysis so far suggests that a rational marketplace would make these investment choices, and that the behavior is something less than purely rational. Like, what's obstructing if anyone was presented with this option, make this change, save this amount of money, whether they care about environmental issues or public health issues or not, they just say, well, this makes me money. What's holding us up, whether it's regulatory or not, from making that quote-unquote better choice, self-serving choice?
So this is now potentially a long answer, and I don't want to give the long answer. I think you probably are well informed on this subject. The evidence is strong in every market in the world that we have ever looked at, that the barriers to energy efficiency are so high that billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars worth of savings globally go untapped every year. And it's true in Germany, it's true in California, it's true in Vermont, it's true in Australia. And I can give you a list of what all those market barriers are, but really what you want to look at is the evidence. The evidence is that because landlords don't pay the energy bill, or owners don't know what to do, or individual investors have what the economists call an implied discount rate that is so high, they won't do something that has a 2-year payback. If they put their money in the credit union at less than 1% interest, but they won't invest in upgrading their refrigerator that would give them a 20% rate of return in energy savings. You know, we all live in this world, and we all know that these things are true. That's why we invented energy efficiency programs, as well as appliance codes and standards, in order to break down those barriers. We need frankly, a portfolio of techniques to break down those market barriers. They're proven to work. It's not theoretical. It's based on actual experience that we had in our own state. So I'm answering your question in a way, because I think you all in this committee already kind of know this. But if you want chapter and verse, we can do it.
Well, maybe another time. I mean, honestly, we stumble in this building repeatedly. And in the face of those facts and proven programs, we don't implement them at a level that clearly would be beneficial.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, and that's why frankly, I've devoted most of my career to this topic for the reasons that it's good for businesses, it's good for families, it's good for the environment. And in the case of Vermont, we're spending $500 million, we're spending $2 billion a year, really, to import carbon that we actually don't want to burn. We actually have a legislative mandate that says we don't want to burn this, and we're still spending the money. So just working down the list quickly, you've already heard the story. Advanced wood heat is a win-win-win for Vermont. Thermal efficiency in housing generally should be a high priority, and figuring out a modest way of raising money to pay for it. You know, consider that the amount of money you have to spend is far less than the benefits. We should support the Transportation Climate Initiative in this region with our neighboring states. And we could start really immediately with a program to put low-cost, low-emission vehicles in the hands of low-income and working families in Vermont.
Can we get a thumbnail on how to do the last one?
I was speaking with Sue Minter, who now runs the Community Action Agency in Central Vermont, about a program that they run for low-income people who have the desperate need of getting a vehicle so they can get to work or get health care or whatever. And those vehicles are typically clunkers, historically. And, you know, I would just say, why not start with a program to put used hybrids or electric vehicles that are coming off of leases that are actually fairly inexpensive. Why not get them in the hands of those families? They're lower cost to maintain, and it makes a point that we want to design an EV program that works for everybody.
Southern California is taking a very large share of its Volkswagen $700 and putting them into low-income electric transportation.
Right. There are other people who obviously have the same kind of goal. If there's anything that we at RAP can do to assist the committee, please just let us know.
How do we get people to buy more low carbon using vehicles so that 6 years from now we have used cars to provide to people to buy used cars?
It gets SUVs and trucks that are low emission.
Pardon?
They have to have four-wheel drive SUVs and trucks.
That are low emission.
Yeah.
How do you get people to buy them?
They don't exist. Tesla makes $145,000 one, but I'm gonna own a pickup.
Well,
truck, and
you
they're
can
like,
might
my wife's got
incentivize
seven
people to
SUVs.
buy them, and then
How do you
create a low-income
get manufacturers to manufacture lower carbon emission vehicles?
Create a market demand for them.
How do you make the market demand and get people to buy low emission vehicles? How do you do it?
So,
As a marketing thing, how do you do it?
Well, we have a guest in the chair, so let's...
Okay. The answers that don't work, so.
I'm looking at Dave Farnsworth, who is really worked a lot on the electric vehicles side of things.
I would observe, you're talking about market transformation.
Transform the market for us to create.
Transforming the market, you need to provide some startup funding. And one way, Rich just talked about, instead of using a good news garage beater, it's great that people donate their old cars and get a break on their taxes and make them available to folks at the capstone programs. But find those cars, find low-cost, low-emitting cars, and do that there. Maybe a program where folks go to get their catalytic converter checked, and there's a big light on the dashboard, and they're looking at their $1,000 car, and they're told that they need a $1,000 fix. Maybe that's the cash for clunkers point where you'd say, you know that there's a state program where you could get $5,000 off an $8,000 used EV.
Where's the money come from?
You have to join TCI and join the Transportation Climate Initiative, and that might help you start funding this.
I'm all for joining the Transportation Climate Initiative of a whole bunch of states. Next year, or the year after, how do you get people to buy fewer of the big pickup trucks and more of the carbon, the more miserly carbon consumers?
You're talking about the margin of difference between an EV and a typical car that somebody can buy today, and that's where a program can come in and make up the difference. So people aren't paying more upfront for an EV necessarily because they get some incentive to make that, to buy the EV instead of the conventional vehicle.
Where do you get the incentive money from in a system that works?
Our modeling, the modeling that MJ Bradley suggested, if you put 2 cents on a gallon of gasoline and diesel, it'll allow you to come up with the money to put Vermont on that path over the next 12 years to transform the light duty vehicle market.
And for the average person that drives, 2 cents is 2 cents. Hell, the government's going to charge us 4 cents to fix potholes. Why am I going to change my purchase practices for 2 cents on diesel?
It's not going to change your practices, but it'll give you a pot of money.
revenue, right?
It'll give you a pot of money to develop a program to target the right folks. You know, 2 cents. I don't know what you pay in Randolph, but you probably pay 2 cents less in Randolph than I do in South Royalton. 2 cents is kind of background noise.
So we're dealing with chicken feed right now. How do you get?
So I would like to.
Socratic method is not working.
I would like to help. I would like to help you out there, right? Dave sort of gave the answer. This is our basic point. You don't need a $400 carbon tax, $400 a ton carbon tax, which, by the way, I think was associated with something like a $100 a ton charge to begin with. Yes, you don't need that in order to drive change. What you need is a well-designed program, and you need a modest revenue source to feed that program. And we calculated, as Dave just said, 2 cents a gallon on gasoline would be enough to fund a market transformation program for electric vehicles in Vermont. We know from the electricity and natural gas programs that something in the range of 5 to 7% of revenue, the total amount we spend on energy devoted to efficiency, will return far more than that in energy savings. And so these are, I mean, you have quoted Amy Levinson in the past. Amy at one point said, this is better than a free lunch. This is a lunch you are paid to eat. The programs that we're talking about here are the straightforward, we know how to do them, and we have given you a fairly modest menu.
Great. Well, I have a quick question to probably tee up a conversation outside of the committee. One thing we've talked about here in the past, and actually tried to address through a bill that I hope we'll be looking at post-crossover, is that it'd be helpful if we had a spreadsheet or metrics that we could use in the legislature, at the department, and at the PUC that would look at full cost benefit, full life cycle analysis for energy issues, so that when we want to talk about the negative, we want to value negative externalities so we can see them and make rational choices. Right now, I don't think we have a shared mathematics between this building, department, and the PUC. And I'll be calling you up to ask for some assistance in looking how we would express that. Then it'll be our lift to try to implement it.
Well, I'm sure RAP would be happy to collaborate, and I'm looking at my old friend Riley here, who is Riley Allen from the department, who has worked in all three of those. He's worked at the board, the department, and at RAP. So he's
That spreadsheet's in his head.
he internalizes a lot of it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for an informative and today empowering visit.
Thank you very much.